Hey, we're back here with Mark. How's it going?
Very good, very good.
Yeah, so I didn't feel like I could preach in my bright green Sasquatch shirt. Wait, what do you think? You think they told us muted colors?
It's totally okay.
It is? Well, I decided it would be better for me to go back home and get the exact same shirt you were wearing.
Well, because we color coordinate. That's what we try to do.
Well, that's what they told us.
Excellence here.
Muted. I told Heidi, she picks out my shirt. And I say, I don't know, dark and muted, whatever that means.
Well, there's only so many colors that are dark and muted, right?
I don't even know what it means. I know what dark means, obviously. All right, so we've been doing this series, man. We've been talking about going through faith and fear and these kinds of things. And so we're in Judges today. And I remember when I first studied Judges, the person that was leading me talked about this cycle that they would go through. Where, they're doing the right thing, and then suddenly they would fall into sin. Mm-hmm. And then a judgment from God would come. So sin, then judgment, and then repentance, and then God would come and deliver them. And like the whole book of Judges is just that over and over and over again. So you're doing fine, and then suddenly you're not. Then the judgment of God comes. Then you feel real bad about it, and then God comes in and helps you. So I've decided that really the book of Judges is the least relevant book in all the scripture.
Doesn't have anything to do with us.
I don't know anybody who does that. I don't know anybody who lives their life that way. I don't know. So we're talking about. So we're in one of these cycles right now, and they've been sinning against God. And the Midianites is this other group of people that have come into the Israelites and are been oppressing them, been hurting, and so now they're totally scared, and so they're hiding in caves and doing all these things. And finally, after 7 years of this, they're in the repentance set of the cycle, and they've kind of reached out to God, and God is now asking them God is now to bring them some deliverance. And so usually, again, the judges, God will pick out a particular person or a group of people to come alongside them and bring them out. So they're now in this repentance cycle, and the repentance part of the cycle, and now they're looking for God's deliverance. And so God is picking a guy named Gideon. And so we are in Judges chapter 6, starting in verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat underneath the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. Can we just say, come on now.
That's the reason you're reading the scriptures.
If you just go confidently, you just got to be confident.
Yeah, I'm impressed, man.
Ophrah and Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." There's a real interesting contrast right there. Mm-hmm. He is hiding. He's a farmer. Obviously, he's got wheat. He's getting ready to make bread or whatever. Rather than doing it out, he's in the wine press, hiding so nobody will see him. And then the angel says, "What?
Oh, mighty man of valor!
Mighty man of valor, hiding in a hole." All right. And Gideon said to him, "Please, sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." So we're introduced here to the person that theoretically God is going to bring deliverance to the Israelites to, a guy named Gideon. And when we were talking about this, I kind of picked this as one of the 4 stories we wanted to do, and then your eyes got real big. Mm-hmm. And then you said, "This is my absolute favorite story." So I guess my question is, what is it about him, the story, that you like so much?
Yeah, I get a little bit giddy about Gideon.
Was that an intentional play on words?
It's actually on my notes.
Is it really? I don't see it there.
My humor is not really. Yeah, it's subpar. But I have said before, I really like the Rocky movies, right? Mm-hmm. And Gideon is like my main verse, my main story that proves that God does too. Mm. He loves Rocky. He loves the underdog.
Mm. So it's the underdog.
It's this underdog story, which is not. It's not like Gideon's alone, and this story is the only one. I mean, it's just all over the scriptures that there's the one, the least, the one that you would least expect, the one that all the odds are stacked against. That story where God steps in His power and His presence, it changes the game. But Gideon is just this picture where God says some things and does some things that just bring so much attention that that's what he's doing. He is stacking the deck against Gideon, you know? And even in that Rocky story, one of the things I love, Rocky 1, is when he's looking at it one way and he's talking to Adrian before the fight. I won't try to speak Rocky, but he's talking to Adrian before the fight, and he basically says, man, I'm going to have to view this differently than the way that I've been viewing it. And, the start of this story, I mean, he's in a wine press, threshing wheat, which is just, he's protecting it because the Midianites would come in, and if they saw it, they would just take it. They would just ravage the land. So he's protecting it, and he's scared, and you can tell from the rest of that, too, that God says, I'm with you, and he's like, what do you mean you're with us? Yeah, what about those stories we heard about the way you took care of our people and got us out of Egypt, and we're with, those stories, but in my lifetime and looking around me, I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing you with us. And then that God would speak to him and say, instead of all that, he would look at him and say, you mighty man of courage, of valor. It just tells us, if you're a note taker, maybe the thing to write down here is faith over fear is recognizing that our vision is just limited. Gideon's looking at his situation, and as he looks at it, it appears that God is not present. As he looks at himself, he sees somebody he doesn't see a mighty man of valor. And yet God steps into it. This angel of the Lord comes to him and says something different about his situation. And just recognizing that what God sees in his perspective, and this has been a kind of a theme of the things we've been talking about, that his perspective is different and so much bigger than ours. We are so limited in what we're able to see. All Gideon can see is what he's experienced and what he's experiencing and the fear that he feels in his heart. And it's hard for him to see from God's perspective that our massive God, that his massive God is present and is in control, even in the midst of something that feels chaotic.
That's really good. That's really good. And so he gives him this weird greeting, mighty man of valor, to the dude who's hiding. And Gideon's response is this question. Well, if this is true, then where has God been? What's up with God? Why has God abandoned us? Which is kind of one of my little favorite kind of sub-themes of the Bible, is the way that God responds to why questions. Like Job did that a little bit when we talked about before, throughout the book, and then he just rebukes him and says, where were you when I created the world? The father of John the Baptist essentially does that, and God makes him mute for the entire pregnancy of his wife, and you just see that God doesn't really take kindly to it. So he does that. Well, let's see what the answer he gets is here. Judges 6 verse 14. So he asks him, like, where have you been? You have forsaken us, right? Verse 14. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? So he ignored the question.
Just ignored it.
Which is actually really good for Gideon.
Yeah.
It's better than Job got. It's better than Zechariah got. I mean, he just ignores the question entirely. He's like, moving on is kind of essentially what he's doing. And he said to him, please, Lord, it's Gideon, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. Now, this is an interesting thing. Moses makes a complaint. It's like, hey, you're sending me to do this thing. I'm not a very good talker. I mean, it's a legitimate complaint. Mm-hmm. And now he's like, Gideon, I'm going to send you to do this huge, great, incredible thing. He's like, well, honestly, we're not that big of a deal, so nobody's going to listen to us. And even in our family that no one thinks highly of, I'm the worst one in that family. I can't even get my younger siblings to listen to me. And so this doesn't make sense. This is like, they're valid. I mean, and
what do you do with that?
What do you do with that?
Yeah, I mean, it taught me a lot just studying back through this and thinking about the way that God just ignores the question. He just pushes right past it, like, boy, I'm God. And that thing that you're saying, even though, yeah, you're right. I mean, all those things from my perspective, if I was Gideon and I was looking at myself, those are the things that I'm afraid of when I view myself. My clan is the weakest. I'm the weakest of that bunch. I know that my knees are shaking and trembling in fear right now in the situation that we're in. And you're calling me a mighty man of valor, and you're saying that I'm going to go do this incredible thing, and I don't feel like that person. And instead of God giving it any weight, he just passes by it. But then also, he says again, the X factor: I am with you, but I am with you. And maybe just a thing to remember here: faith over fear is believing what God says about us. And one of the big things that he said to Gideon, that he also says of us, is that he is present with us. And when he is present with us, then the whole game changes. And so all the things, while we may look at it one way and we may be able to say that all these things are true and clearly see our weaknesses, it appears from the scriptures and from this story that that's actually a strength. I recognize my weakness, and I recognize that my only hope is this presence of this Almighty God,
Yeah, it almost seems like it feels like what, again, but I guess just because of my personality and what I'm like. I mean, like God's trolling him a little bit. Mighty man of valor hiding in this hole. And then he's like, why did you leave us? And he says, go in this strength of yours and go to, it's like you want to think, it feels like if we were talking this way, we'd be mocking him.
Right.
But that's not what God's doing. He sees something in Gideon that Gideon doesn't see.
Mm-hmm.
And he is calling him up to something greater that is in him that he doesn't see, but that God sees, which I think is really, really cool. And so then he's like, so now he's got this big plan. He's like, you're just a nobody. How do you go from a nobody in your own family, in a clan that's a nobody, to raising up an army to conquer the oppressors? And so this is the task, at least the first part of the task, Judges 6, verse 25 and 26. That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of the stronghold here, with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering, with the wood of the Asherah that you cut down. So Baal, if you're ever reading through the Old Testament, you're going to see Baal and Asherah a lot. Essentially, these are gods and tools of worshiping other gods that they would have. And so there were just these other deities out there that the Israelites would just kind of go to worship, that were worshipped by other people in the area, and these practices would come in, and it just seems like everything. Like you go through First Kings Chronicles, it's always about tearing down the altars of the Baals and ripping down the Asherah poles, just over and over again. And so in his family and in his town, there was obviously, amongst his clan, there was worship of these false gods. And they had the idols and the poles set up for this worship. And so he says, here's what I want you to do. First thing I want you to do, I want you to tear all that down in your little area and build an altar to the Lord and sacrifice a bull there. And so I'm sure, again, Gideon's thinking, I'm the weakest one here. I can't do this. But he does it. But he does it at night. Mighty man of valor, so that no one will find out. But it's like, apparently somebody must have known, because it woke up the next morning and was like, who did this? And somebody knew. It was Gideon. Gideon did it. And so they're about to go after him, which totally makes sense. And then Gideon's dad kind of steps up for him, which is kind of cool, and says, I thought we're talking about a God here. If a God wanted to defend himself, a God could. But he doesn't. And so they kind of backed off a little bit.
Genius by his dad.
Yeah. And so then it's kind of like, so then it goes to the next, so then whatever, I guess that story spreads. And so suddenly he's now able to kind of raise up this army. So he starts with being a nobody, does this thing in his own clan, and is now able to kind of raise up this army. So this is a big thing God asked him to do. What do we learn from that? What do we learn from this overwhelming task and series of tasks and mission that God has called Gideon to? What do we learn from that?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to me that he says you're going to go save Israel from Midian, and then the thing he tells him to do. I mean, if I was writing the story or if I was looking at the next thing, I would say, okay, so then he's going to go and somehow go after Midian. But what God says is, take your daddy's bulls, pull down the temple, and then burn them on top of that, right? As a sacrifice to me. Which, man, it's like he's going back to his own house and doing this thing that I don't know I would be able to put the pieces together that this is going to result in that thing that you said I was going to do. So it seems like a really interesting step for him to take. And he does it at night. Still, he's afraid. But what's amazing to me is Gideon does it. I mean, evidently there is that courage, that God-given strength to take that obedience of that next step. And faith over fear is about that taking that next step of obedience. Because God, in this story, and I don't know about your experience, but for sure in my life, man, it's never 20 steps down in the full picture that I get. It's always listening and being able to see what is that next thing that he's calling me to do. God, please give me courage to take that step. And a lot of times that step doesn't seem to have anything to do with that big picture. And it seems odd and it seems strange and it seems really scary, but that's the thing. And then God uses it because evidently, in this daddy, I just love his play, man. It's brilliant. It's like, man, what do you don't hurt him. If Baal's so big, can't he defend himself? And because of that, he gets this name that then when he calls the other tribes together, they're like, oh man, that's that guy that took on Baal. And all of a sudden, the weakest becomes this voice that rallies all the people together, you know?
You just wonder, I want to overanalyze this poor guy Gideon, but it's like, you wonder, what were the voices in his head that were telling him he couldn't? Because God says you can, and like you said, he did, and his dad looked at that and said,
something.
I respect that. And so like I said, is that when he finally gained the approval of his dad or whatever? I mean, like, this is way off, but there's just something. He had something. And God saw it. Man. God saw it and brought it out. And like you said, all it took for him is just one step of obedience. And then suddenly something you didn't know was there, that God knew was there, he's bringing it out in you. I just love that. I mean, it's like we got a whole bunch of people out there that are
so applicable.
Mighty people of courage, mighty people of morality, of strength, of patience, of grace, of forgiveness. They have these qualities in them, and God sees them, and he's drawing them out. And one step of obedience. Yeah,
and the big picture is overwhelming to us. It would have been overwhelming to Gideon if he saw the rest of the story, but God just gave him that next step. Man, do this, you know.
So now we're to the point where Gideon has put together this army, right? He's got this big army. So obviously we know what happens next. He's got an army, and there's this oppressive people. He's going to take his army and go fight that army, and God will be with them, and the armies will fight, and God will be with them, and our army will beat their army. That's the end. That's where we should be in this story. But I guess spoiler for them, spoiler for us. That's not what happens. What happens is something incredibly unexpected. Chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead." Then 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. Now that's crazy. So you've got an army of 32,000 people. You've rallied this great thing, and you're Gideon, and you're thinking, I can't believe this happened. God is awesome. Maybe I am a mighty man of valor. I've got 32,000 people army I'm now leading. And God's response is, your army is too big. You've got too many people in your army. And so he sends anybody who's scared, 22,000 people go home. Maybe that's a different sermon. Like, how'd those 22,000 people get there? But I don't know. And so he tells the scaredy cats to go home. And then he says this, verse 4, Judges 7. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And any one of whom I say to you, this one go with you, shall go with you, and any one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, shall not go." So then what he does, this is really funny, this is like a weird part of the story. He said, go down to the river and tell everybody to get a drink. And there's two groups of people. How would you get water? If you were going to drink from a river,
I think I would cup it with my hands.
Yeah, so there's two people. There's the hand cuppers, and then there's the dog lappers, I guess. People just kind of like okay. So God just splits them up.
Yeah. With using this thing that there's no way, Brendan and I were talking about this yesterday, like it's not like Gideon could have looked at the bunch. I mean, his first division was scaredy cats go home. So then you lost 22,000, but you got this 10,000, and this 10,000 is stout. I mean, they stayed, the line was drawn, and they stayed. The next round could be, hey, now Gideon just picked me 300. But if he had done that, he'd gone, oh, man, that guy's bigger, that guy, we know that guy's good with a sword. This, which 300 did he get?
The people who acquire water from a river, a particular,
and that made them qualify.
That is a qualifying.
I mean, is this not? You don't think this military training in the U.S. Army is what they? This is what you're supposed to do, General?
That would be amazing. How do you pick Navy SEALs?
How do they drink from the? Yeah.
Whether or not you hold your pinky out when you drink from a cup, I don't know. So clearly, he's gone from 32,000 to 10,000, now to ultimately 300. Why? Why would God do this? Why would God intentionally make this more difficult for Gideon?
One thing I love about this passage of this part of the story is that God tells us. He says, if you got victory with this many men, you would be tempted to say it was because of your strength, because of your hand. And I am going to make sure that that's not the case. That when this thing is said and done, I'm going to leave no doubt that it was me, God, me and my power, and not you and your strength or the strength of your men. And so he does, man. He sends the scaredy cats home. Then he does this crazy thing, and then it gets down to just this band of 300. It's like, man, this is not possible. Exactly. That's what God was trying to do. He was setting the stage where the odds were so far against them that nobody could make any case that it was something that they had accomplished. But everybody had to stop and say, our God has done this. And that's, in this series, Faith Over Fear, faith over fear is denying the odds for the glory of God. That this is where God dwells, in this place where it is impossible, because he's the one that does things that are impossible.
That's really good. And so I love the way the story plays out. So now he's got 300 people. And so the Midianites are all in this camp. And so at night they go up, and now they're up high above this camp, and then they've got all these noisemakers, right? Like
pots and clay things and trumpets.
They've got horns and clay pots. And so at this moment, like above at the top, kind of there in the bottom of this canyon, they're up here, they smash these clay pots and then start blowing these trumpets. And I can only imagine, like you're in the bottom you're in the bottom and you're surrounded by these mountains, how loud that must have been, right? And so the trumpets and the clay pots break, and this noise just echoes throughout there, and the Midianites wake up terrified. So what are you thinking? Like, you're a Midianite, you wake up in the middle of the night and you hear that. What are you thinking?
Yeah, you're not thinking. You're thinking we're under attack, and you should totally go back and read the story too, because there's this whole exchange where Gideon's still struggling to believe, and he goes down and he listens to them, and one of the enemy army, one of the guys, he's had a dream, and he knows that, and so Gideon knows that they're already afraid, and that gives him faith to go back and lead them to go do this, and so there is fear already in that camp. So when they heard that, oh man, it's on, You're
not thinking there's 300 people above me.
Right.
I'm thinking there's tens of thousands of people surrounding me. So you wake up in the middle of the night, and it's not like there's, it's the middle of the night, so it's dark. You're surrounded by these hills or whatever, so you're not getting necessarily a whole lot of light, and there's certainly not street lamps, right? You're scared to death. There's not a whole lot of light, and next thing you know, I'm attacking the first part. I'm attacking the first person I see with a sword, which happens to be my compatriot who is just in the tent next to me, and they essentially take themselves out, which just by itself is a brilliant strategy. And it could have just been that, right? It could have just been, Gideon, I've got this super incredible plan, and I only need you to get 300 people, and I promise it's going to work. And explain it to him, and I'd be like, that's genius. And I'm going to do this thing, make sure they're scared, and I'll take care of it. And then went through a lot of extra steps to get to what was just this really interesting plan. So we got all this, and they turn it up. So this is all just crazy. God goes through all these extra steps. He makes it intentionally hard. He's taking Gideon through this crazy process. So what do we do? How do I apply this? What is the point of this for me?
Yeah, I mean, just reflecting on it myself, I just see how much I'm exactly like Gideon. And how every step of it seems so much just a process that I need to work myself through. Like, man, I am. And just as an example, the chaos and the crisis that we're in right now, there's so many ways that I could look around me and say, oh man, this is broken and that's broken and this is tough and that's tough and this trial and that trial, and look at myself and feel inadequate. And there's just this constant reminder, man, I need to stop and remember He is with us. He is powerful and present. He gives peace, and I need to rest in that and trust. And then looking at my life and having the courage. I mean, for God to say to me or to us, "Oh, mighty man of valor," I feel like I would probably laugh a little bit, because I know my own heart, and I know how nervous and anxious and scared I am with so many different areas of my life. But this trust that even the ones that seem like the cards are so stacked against, that the odds are so big, that my God, that's what He does. He thrives in those kind of settings. So yeah, make the odds bigger. Yeah, it just got tougher. Okay, I can't wait to watch Him show up, we just need to live that way,
Right.
And that next step of obedience, to really listen and to not worry about the things that are down the road, but to really identify what that is and ask God for clarity, and then just bow up and have the courage to do that thing,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we would be talking about people who are hiding, because I think there's a lot of us who probably feel that way. Like, I'm hiding, I'm kind of cowering, I don't know what to do, and trust God. I mean, I trust God that whatever is next for me, that I believe Him. I believe that He's with me. In a non-virus world, there are still a lot of us hiding in a hole. There right now, and I'm not calling out obviously anybody in particular. Right now, there are two people sitting next to each other on a couch, and even though they're only 12 inches away from each other, there's a mile between them. And mighty man of valor, grab that woman's hand and tell her that you love her. Mighty woman of valor, put your arm around him and tell him that you're sorry. Person of valor, send that person a text, give them a call, put down that thing that is causing you sin. You can overcome these things. And these gaps, there was a huge obvious gap between where Gideon was in leading an army. It was obvious. I think some of ours are less obvious. But it's going to take that same level of trust and obedience. If you will take this step of faith with me, and take this next step with your family, with your friends, in your personal life, in reaching out, making a difference in the lives of people around you, if you will take this next step, you will not believe the really big, awesome thing that's on the other side. So I tell you, man, this has been really good. I love sharing the story with you. I mean, this has been a different kind of format, and I've loved it. But I've loved just being able just to kind of sit here next to you and see and hear your passion about what this is. And I know that they've loved it as well. As always, we're kind of moving to our response time now. We'll have some more worship. I encourage you, if you would like, kind of like we do every Sunday when we're here, if you want to take communion, to go get those elements and take them as we're worshiping. And I just encourage you, men and women of valor, what is that step? That next step that may feel overwhelming right now, that God is calling you to step out and take. What is that next step of obedience where you can choose faith over fear? Let's just pray for that, for ourselves and for each other. Let me pray.